Hey, welcome to the Brave Family podcast, episode numero 1, everybody. Isn't this fun? We're doing our first podcast. It's really neat. Hey, we believe that strong families build strong communities, and this podcast is all about creating a winning family culture so you can have a strong family. We just believe that you can have the family that you always dreamed of with the right tools, and we want to help you with that because we just believe that there's a lot of families that don't know how to navigate culture right now because it's a little crazy.
It's a little dicey out there.
I know it's a little crazy out there, and we think that we can help. And so through the next several podcast episodes, we're going to be going through a framework that Shishelle, my co-host, the boss in charge over here, my beautiful wife, and I have created to help you guys navigate and create culture.
And we're going to talk about why culture matters and what does it mean to design a family culture?
Yeah, because, hey, listen, culture matters. I think culture is kind of hard to define sometimes, right? Especially when we're talking about a family culture. I think we understand what the culture of society is like because it feels like it's anti, whatever we're trying to accomplish sometimes. But what does it mean to have a family culture, right?
Right, and family culture too is so much more of a feel than just a list of do's and don'ts. I think, we look at families and we see something in their family that we like, we want to emulate, but just doing what they do does not necessarily produce that feel that we want.
Yeah, and that's how I would define culture. I define culture like, what does it mean to, what does it feel like to be a part of team X? Like for us, we're the Rosners. Yeah. So what does it feel like to be a Rosner? Now for, Shishelle and I, that can be hard to define. But if we were to ask our kids, what does it feel like to be a Rosner? They could tell you pretty fast.
They'd say exactly.
And some of the time they would tell us something that we don't necessarily like hearing, right?
Right. And we don't really ask ourselves, what does it feel like to be a Rosner? But those kids, they know, do they feel safe? Do they feel comfortable? Are they confident? Is home a place that they want to be? Are they having fun? Is it a place where they're refreshed and rebuilt just when they get knocked around from the day-to-day cares of life, right?
Yeah, that's right. And what culture does, it allows you to write your own rules.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a lot of societal expectations, and man, if you are a person of faith, a Christian, we're Christians, and even within our own subculture of being Christians, there are expectations of what a Christian family is supposed to be. But the reality is that your family doesn't have to look like my family.
Yeah, that's so good.
Your family doesn't even have to look like the family that you're trying to emulate or that you look up to or that you think is great. But your family does need to look like the family that you want to have. You have to have. If there is an idea of a family that you want to experience, it's up to you to define what that is. So you get to write your own rules.
And I think culture, your family culture will diffuse the well-meaning impositions of other people that they try to impose their ideas on what your family should or shouldn't look like.
Well, yeah, for sure, because you've got all kinds of dynamics that come into this, right? You've got in-laws, you have teachers, you have your pastor, you've got your friends, family members, and everybody is, they're well-meaning people for the most part. They love you, they want the best for your family, and so they start to impose their expectations on your family. Hello, mother-in-laws, right? Come on, or father-in-laws, grandpas and grandmas, right? Man, they love us dearly, but they may be imposing onto your family. Well, what having a well-defined culture does, it diffuses those imposing standards of those well-meaning people that are in your life so that you can experience what it is that you want in your family, right?
So good.
Yeah. I think the greatest things about family are really not the things that can be explained, but the greatest things about family, they're meant to be experienced.
Right.
And
that's why it's hard to explain family culture, because it's really the greatest things about family are hard to explain because they're meant to be experienced.
Oh, for sure. Give me an example of that, Shishelle. So in our family, what it feels to be like a Rosner, which what's hard to explain but is experienced in our family.
So sure. I would say an example of that is, my kids are famous for giving me a hard time about having them do chores, right? And they do a lot of family chores. But if you were just to look from the outside in and say, wow, the Rosner kids do a lot of chores, Well, yeah, but what you don't see is all the dance parties we have in the kitchen. Like that fun factor is part of what we do to bring the barriers down in the family, celebrate what we want to duplicate, have fun, and have a good attitude even in hard things, which it pushes a culture into our family.
Yeah. And really the idea of family culture, though, it comes from this idea that was pioneered by Dr. Murray Bowen, Dr. Murray Bowen, and he pioneered this idea called family systems theory.
Yeah.
And so family systems theory says that every member in the family, we kind of all live in the same family, emotional skin, so to speak, right? And so when you have somebody in the family that's overly anxious, that anxious person actually affects emotionally the other members of the family.
Right.
And likewise, when you have a non-anxious person, for example, in the family, that also affects the other members in the family. And so what that does is it means that this feel over function is really important because, I don't know if you've ever heard the old saying, or Shishel, if you've ever heard the old saying, like, your facts don't care about your feelings.
Right, sure, I've heard that.
Right? Well, the opposite is true. Like, feelings don't care about your facts. Have you ever tried to deal and speak like in rational language to a 3-year-old when they're throwing a
Their
tantrum,
feelings
right?
are driving that ship.
They don't care what your facts are because that's how they feel. Right. Have you had a teenager in the house before? Like, man, they don't always care about your facts. It's more feeling driven. Well, that feeling or those emotions that are tied to that, they affect the other parts of the family and the people in the family. And that's where this idea of family culture comes from, because you get to decide what your family culture is going to be. I mean, your family culture is going to be the experience that you get to have with your family, not necessarily. What am I trying to say? I feel like.
Well, I think that you design the family culture that you want to have. And you have a family culture, whether it's by default or by design.
For a moment, can we just take a minute and talk about why family culture is important?
Sure.
I think we've defined a little bit of what it is. Like what is family culture? We've defined how it, some benefits of family culture, right? But in the day and age in which we live, like, having your own family culture is really important. Why is it important? And then let's just briefly, before we end the podcast, talk about how you create family culture, because the rest of the episodes we're going to go over a little bit more in depth, step by step. And we created a whole framework behind this that you guys can download online if you want to. The links will be in the description and all that stuff. And I have there's an equation that we'll go over as well. But real quick, why is this important today? And why did you and I? Why do we feel like? Why did we feel so
strongly?
Well, strongly, but why are we so passionate about sharing this with families right now?
Right. When I think about our early days of building our family, we came from such extreme different backgrounds that we wanted to just kind of define what we wanted our family to look like, to take the fight out of it, because we're both strong personalities. Yeah. We're both driving, in a certain direction. And really what you want your family to look like is what needs to be in the driver's seat of your family. And so we took a family curriculum and implemented that and said, okay, it doesn't have to be your way. It doesn't have to be my way, but let's agree on a few parameters and then just run the play. Yeah. And that took so much pressure off of us as a family. And then we started to learn, hey, what do we want? What do we enjoy as a family? What tools do we need to build what tools do we need to implement to build that family that we want? I think one of the big steering points in the most early days, we wanted to like our kids. We wanted to raise kids. I remember there was a person that I really admired, but they were struggling so much with their children. And I said, hey, what are you trying to do here? And this mom said, I'm just trying for my kids not to hate me when they become an adult.
Oh man, I remember that.
Oh, that hit me so hard. And I think there's a lot of parents who are going through their parental walk just trying to not be hated, where we really wanted to enjoy our kids. And even now when they say, people will often say, oh, your boys are so great. And my response is, I really enjoy our boys.
Yeah. And we do enjoy our boys, but you know, and I think we've learned a lot, and we've made a lot of mistakes along the way too.
Absolutely.
You know, like, I mean, we're certainly not perfect. This is not the perfect family culture framework, right? Because that doesn't exist by any means. But we live in a world right now that is everything regarding identity is seems like it's very fluid.
Very
fluid.
Fluid
Is a good way to say it. But family culture exists so that you can help give your kids and the adults in that family an identity to live by. And if somebody's not going to do it, we just felt like it's going to be us. And so
if you don't tell your kids who they are and push those values downstream, somebody else is going to tell your kids who they are.
They're going to tell your kids who they are. Listen, your kids are going to be parented by the internet. They're going to be parented by their school teachers. Right. They're going to be parented by their coaches. If you don't do it on purpose, somebody's going to influence your kids, and it's going to influence the outcomes that you're going to experience in your family if it's not you. And that's why we feel like having a strong family culture is so important. So with that, let me just share with you real quick what we've created is kind of the equation to building family culture. It's pretty simple. It's language plus action over time equals culture. So let me say that again. Language plus action over time equals culture. Okay? So the things that come out of your mouth consistently come out of your mouth, plus the actions that you take over time produce culture. Okay? Everything with family is long game, but in a couple episodes from now, we'll show you how to kind of fast forward the behaviors you want, because I think a lot of people, they're just like, hey, can you just help me get this 5-year-old to do what I want him to do when I ask him to do it, right? And so, but culture is more than that, and culture will trump the rules and the behavior every single time, and you'll see the benefits of it, but it is a little bit long game. That's why we say over time. So language plus action over time produces culture. So we'll get into it a little bit more, but how did we come about that equation in our family?
Tell me.
You're hilarious right now. Because whether I like it or not, what just comes out of my mouth does not always affect what my kids do or how my wife responds to me, but my actions with language and doing that to build trust over time is what really builds those relationships. It also it really pushes behavior and expectations that way as well too. I think we have a lot of false expectations when we go into our marriage relationships. We have a lot of false expectations when we get into parenting. That's why people get into parenting and they're like, man, I really wanted to have a baby. I just didn't realize it was going to be this much work, right? Like all those expectations. But that's why it's over time, because if you don't give direction, so if you don't actually use language to define what it is that you're trying to do, your actions don't matter either. Right? Like people say, hey, talk is cheap. Talk is not cheap. Listen, talk is just as important as action, but one of them alone without each other doesn't really produce anything. And so what we just realized in our family was when we actually backed up the things that we said, that's when doing that over time built trust with our kids. We built trust with each other, and it created kind of this feeling in our family that we started to enjoy. And it wasn't always that way for us.
No, but we wanted our kids to understand the why behind the what. So they knew that we weren't just asking them for behavior modification. It wasn't rote rules for the sake of having rules or just having behavior that was easy for us to manage, but we wanted to know the moral reason why we were asking them to do what they were doing in a language that was young enough that they could understand it, sticky statements to back up that action over time to really create that feel that we were looking for.
That's right. And we'll teach you and we'll talk more about how you can create that in future episodes. But today, I just wanted you to know that there's a culture that you can have that is going to produce the family that you've always wanted. Because, hey, remember, you can have the family that you've always dreamed of, and that family can change the world.